You gonna cry, kid? Is that what's gonna happen? You gonna cry because you can't hit the broadside of a barn from 10 feet away? The voice, loud and laced with a grating, self-satisfied arrogance, sliced through the rhythmic pop-pop-pop of the shooting range. It came from Lane 4, from a man built like a piece of industrial equipment, with a tribal tattoo coiling around a bicep thicker than a fence post. He and his two friends, all buzz cuts and tactical gear that looked more expensive than the car they'd arrived in, were laughing. Their target was the young man in Lane 5, a kid named Leo who couldn't have been more than 19. His shoulders were slumped, his face flushed with a shame so hot it was visible even from across the room. From his solitary lane at the far end of the range, William Callow lowered the classic, well-worn pistol he'd been cleaning. He didn't say a word. His movements were slow, deliberate, the practiced economy of a man who had long ago learned that wasted energy was a liability. His eyes, the color of a winter sky, took in the scene. He saw the expensive Glocks and custom rifles in Lane 4. He saw the slick branded apparel proclaiming their owner's supposed allegiance to the Navy SEALs. He saw the trembling hands of the young man in Lane 5 as he tried to reload his rented Sig Sauer, his rented time on the range turning from a hopeful Saturday hobby into a public humiliation. William's gaze lingered on the lead antagonist, the one with the booming voice and the cruel smirk. He saw the swagger, the unearned confidence of a man who mistakes physical prowess for character. William had seen men like him before, in places far louder and more dangerous than this air-conditioned facility. He had seen what happened to them when their bravado was tested by something real. For now, he just watched. His stillness was not inaction, it was assessment. He was a shield, inert, waiting to see if he would be needed. The young man Leo finally managed to seat the magazine, his fumbling hands making the simple action look like a complex puzzle. He raised the pistol, trying to aim at the paper target that was already peppered with stray shots, none of them near the center mass. The lead SEAL's voice boomed again, this time for the benefit of the whole range. "Hey RO, you sure this kid's safe? Might shoot one of us by accident, or maybe himself." His friends howled with laughter, slapping him on the back. The range officer, a tired-looking man in a red polo shirt, glanced over but seemed reluctant to intervene with a group that was spending a lot of money and radiating an aura of untouchable confidence. Leo flinched, his concentration shattered. He lowered the firearm, placing it gently on the small counter in his lane, and just stared at it, defeated. That was the moment, the tipping point. A flicker of something, a decision, passed through William's quiet gaze. He set his own pistol down, the heavy steel making a soft, solid sound against the padded mat. He walked out of his lane, his old leather boots making no sound on the concrete floor. He didn't stride, he didn't march, he simply moved, a calm, unassuming presence, until he was standing just behind the young man. Leo didn't seem to notice him at first, too lost in his own misery. The SEALs in the next lane fell silent, watching this old man with his worn jeans and faded flannel shirt approach the center of their little drama. "May I?" William's voice was low, raspy with disuse, but it carried a strange weight. Leo looked up, startled. He saw a man who could have been his grandfather, with a face etched with lines that spoke of long years and hard suns. There was no judgment in his eyes, only a placid kindness. Leo nodded, unable to speak. William didn't look at the SEALs. He didn't acknowledge their existence. His entire focus was on the young man and the pistol on the counter. "You're pulling," he said softly. "Anticipating the bang. Happens to everyone. You're thinking about the kick before you even squeeze the trigger." He picked up the pistol, his hands moving with a fluid grace that was a stark contrast to his aged appearance. He checked the chamber, the magazine, his movements a silent language of safety and respect for the tool. It's not about forcing it, it's about letting it happen. Like a surprise, he handed the weapon back to Leo. "Align your sights, breathe in, let half of it out and hold. Now don't think about pulling the trigger, think about applying slow, steady pressure. Squeeze it like you're trying to get the last drop of water from a sponge. Let the shot surprise you." Leo, bolstered by this unexpected island of calm, took the pistol. He mimicked the old man's instructions. Breathe in, half out, hold. He focused on the front sight, blurring the target just as he'd read online but couldn't seem to master. He began to squeeze. From lane 4, the inevitable sneer. "Oh, look at this. The old-timer's gonna teach him. What's your expertise, Grandpa? Plinking squirrels with a BB gun back in the 1940s. William didn't turn. He kept his body angled slightly, a subtle but definite shield between Leo and the mockery. His voice remained quiet, meant only for the boy. "Ignore them. It's just you and the target. Nothing else in the world matters right now. Leo squeezed. The shot was still a surprise, a loud crack that made him jump, but less than before. He looked downrange. A new hole had appeared, just on the edge of the black inner ring of the target. It was the best shot he'd made all day. A small, shaky smile touched his lips. "See?" William said, a hint of warmth in his tone. "You can do it. Just need to get out of your own head." He had done it. He had taken the conflict and absorbed it. The SEALs were no longer laughing at Leo. Their full, undivided and furious attention had now shifted. It was fixed on the quiet old man who had dared to ignore them. "Hey, I'm talking to you, old man," the lead SEAL, the one his friends called Trident, snapped. He stepped out of his lane, crossing the yellow line that separated the shooting stalls from the walkway. He planted himself in front of William, forcing the older man to finally look at him. "Who the hell do you think you are, coming over here and interrupting our training?" William Callow met his gaze. His placid expression didn't change. He needed a little help. "You are offering something else." Trident's face darkened. "We're Navy SEALs, old-timer. I think we know a thing or two about shooting. More than some fossil who probably thinks a musket is high-tech." His friends snickered behind him, their confidence bolstered by their leader's aggression. William simply stood there, a rock in the stream of their contempt. He let the insults wash over him. It was a choice. Leo, standing behind him, watched with wide eyes. He had never seen anyone stand up to bullies like this, not with fists or shouts, but with an unnerving, absolute silence. He was witnessing a form of courage he didn't know existed. Trident circled William, looking him up and down with theatrical disdain. "Look at this guy. Faded flannel, worn-out boots. Let me guess, you got that pistol at a yard sale. What is that, a 1911? A relic, just like you." He gestured to his own state-of-the-art polymer handgun, holstered on his thigh. "This is what real warriors use, lightweight, high capacity, not some heavy piece of steel your grandpappy carried." William's eyes drifted to the pistol in Trident's holster, then back to the man's face. "A weapon is a tool," he said, his voice even. "The only thing that matters is the hand that wields it." The simple truth of the statement seemed to enrage Trident even more. It was a dismissal of his expensive gear, of his entire aesthetic of superiority. "Oh, a philosopher, are we? Let's see what that hand can do, old man. Or are you too busy dispensing folksy wisdom to actually shoot?" William didn't rise to the bait. He turned back to his own lane, intending to gather his things. He had done what he came to do. He had shielded the boy, given him a small victory. The rest was just noise. But Trident wasn't finished. He stepped in front of William again, blocking his path. "We're not done here. I don't like being disrespected, especially by some washed-up nobody who gets his thrills playing hero at a public gun range." The man's voice was getting louder, drawing the attention of the few other patrons and the nervous range officer, who was now inching towards the phone on his desk. The insults kept coming, a barrage of mockery aimed at William's age, his quietness, his assumed poverty. Trident was a performer, and he had an audience. He spoke of his own grueling training, of Bud Slash, of the hell he'd walked through to earn the trident he so proudly displayed. He painted William as a relic, an obstacle, a weak old man who didn't understand the modern world of warfare. And as the tirade reached its crescendo, as Trident leaned in, his voice a guttural roar just inches from William's face, the scene at the gun range dissolved for a moment in William's mind. The sterile, air-conditioned air was replaced by the thick, humid stench of a jungle swamp. The rhythmic pop of .22s and 9mm became the deafening crack of AK-47 fire, much too close. The arrogant face of the SEAL became the terrified, mud-streaked face of a 19-year-old radio man the same age as Leo, screaming into his handset. "They're everywhere. We're being overrun." In the memory, a younger Captain William Callow didn't shout. He didn't panic. He placed a steady hand on the young radio man's shoulder, his voice cutting through the kid's fear in the chaos of the ambush. "Breathe, son. Call in the coordinates I gave you, exactly as I gave them to you. Look at me. We are not being overrun. We are holding the line." The memory, sharp and vivid as the day it was forged, lasted only a second, but it was enough. It was the crucible. It was the source of the calm that Trident mistook for weakness. William returned to the present, his gray eyes as steady as they had been in the jungle 40 years ago. This loud, angry man was not a threat. He was a nuisance. But then the nuisance crossed a line. Frustrated by William's lack of reaction, Trident turned his anger back on the original target. "You know what? This is your fault," he snarled at Leo, who flinched as if struck. "You and your pathetic shooting. You brought this geezer over here. I think we need to teach you a lesson about range etiquette." He took a menacing step toward Lane 5, his friends moving with him. a predatory pack closing in. That was it. The threat was no longer verbal. It was no longer directed at him. It was aimed at the boy he had chosen to protect. William knew, with a certainty that settled in his bones like a winter chill, that this had to end. Now, he didn't raise his voice. He didn't move to physically intercept. He simply said, "That's enough." The words were quiet, but they held an authority that made Trident pause. With a look of profound, almost weary regret on his face, William stepped back to the worn canvas bag at his station. He reached inside, past the spare magazines and the bottle of gun oil, and pulled out his phone. His thumb moved over the screen, tapping out a short, cryptic message to a single, unlisted number. It was a code he had been given decades ago, a protocol he had never once used. He had hoped he would go to his grave without ever needing it. He did it not to win, not to prove a point, but to de-escalate, to protect. It was a shield of last resort. Trident saw the phone and let out a bark of laughter. "What are you doing calling for backup? Who you gonna call, the AARP? Your nurse to come change your diaper." William sent the message. He put the phone back in his bag and looked at the angry man before him. He said nothing. He didn't have to. The protocol was active. The call had been made. In a quiet, secure room buried deep within the sprawling complex of the Pentagon, a screen that normally displayed global troop movements and satellite data flashed red. A single line of text appeared, stark and severe against the dark background. Protocol activation. Shield. Coordinates locked. 38.8719 degrees N. 77.0563 degrees W. The young Navy lieutenant watching the monitor felt a jolt of ice in his veins. He had been briefed on this. Every watch officer in this command center had. It was a ghost protocol, a relic of a bygone era, a contingency so unlikely it was treated as a myth. Until now, he shot to his feet, his chair screeching back. "Sir," he yelled to the commander on the watch floor. "Sir, we have a shield activation. I repeat, we have a shield activation." The commander, a man with 20 years of service and a face that rarely showed emotion, went pale. He ran to the terminal, his eyes confirming the unbelievable. "Shield? Are you certain?" "Confirmed, sir. Location is a civilian facility in Arlington." The commander's voice became steel. He grabbed the secure line on his desk, the one that offered a direct, unfiltered connection to the highest levels of the military. "Get me the Secretary of the Navy. I don't care if he's in a meeting with God. Get him on this line." Now, back at the range, Trident was reveling in his perceived victory. The old man had retreated to his phone, a clear sign of weakness in his mind. He was a coward, just as he thought. He puffed out his chest and turned to his buddies, a triumphant grin on his face. "See? Nothing but a sad old man. All talk, no fight." He then turned his attention back to William, his voice dripping with condescending pity. "Who'd you call, Grandpa? Your daughter to come pick you up? Is it past your nap time?" William didn't answer. He simply stood by his station, his hands resting on the counter, his posture relaxed. He was waiting. He knew what was coming, and the knowledge brought him no joy, only a deep sense of melancholy. He had wanted a quiet day, a few hours of peace with the familiar weight of his pistol in his hand. The first sign was a subtle shift in the air, a distant but rapidly approaching siren that was different from the usual city noise. It was the piercing, authoritative wail of a priority escort. Then another joined it. Within 30 seconds, the sound was deafening, culminating in the screech of tires in the parking lot outside. Through the large plate glass window at the front of the range, everyone could see it. 2 black SUVs, the kind used by federal agencies, and a dark sedan with government plates and flashing lights embedded in its grille. Doors opened with disciplined synchronicity. Men in sharp dark suits emerged, their movements crisp and purposeful. They were not police, they were something else entirely. The range officer stared, his mouth agape. The other shooters lowered their weapons, drawn to the spectacle. Trident and his friends stopped laughing. A knot of confusion and unease began to form in the lead SEAL's stomach. This was too much, too fast, too official. It couldn't possibly have anything to do with the old man. It had to be a coincidence. A raid, maybe. The front door of the gun range swung open. A man in a tailored suit, an earpiece in his ear, stepped inside and scanned the room. His eyes swept past Trident, past Leo, and locked onto William. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. He held the door open as a second man entered. This man was not in a suit. He wore the immaculate dress uniform of a United States Navy captain, his chest a brilliant constellation of ribbons and medals. He was tall, sharp-featured, and carried an aura of command that made Trident's own manufactured bravado look like a child's tantrum. The captain's eyes scanned the room, his gaze cold and analytical. He too saw William, and then, in a moment that froze the air in the entire facility, the captain marched directly toward the quiet old man in the faded flannel shirt. He stopped precisely 3 feet in front of him, his back ramrod straight. He brought his hand up in a salute so sharp and perfect it could have been an illustration in a military manual. "Mr. Kahlo, sir." The captain's voice was loud, formal, and filled with a profound respect that stunned everyone present. "Captain Wallace, Naval Special Warfare Command. I was told you activated the SHIELD protocol. Is the situation secure? Are you harmed?" William returned the salute with a slow, tired nod. "The situation is secure, Captain. I am not harmed. I regret the necessity." Trident stood paralyzed, his jaw slack. Kahlo. William Kahlo. The name tickled a distant memory from his training, a story told in hushed, reverent tones by an old instructor. A ghost, a legend. The captain kept his salute held, his eyes locked on William. "No regret is necessary, sir. The protocol exists for a reason." He then began to speak, his voice projecting for all to hear, a public vindication that was as brutal as it was thorough. "For those of you who are unaware," Captain Wallace announced, his gaze sweeping over the 3 stunned SEALs, "you are in the presence of William Kahlo, Mach 5 SO, Studies and Observation Group, Vietnam, call sign Spectre, 5 tours, recipient of the Navy Cross for his actions at Khe Sanh, where he single-handedly held off a platoon of NVA regulars for 6 hours, protecting the evacuation of his wounded team." Trident felt the blood drain from his face. Mach VSOG, the legendary top-secret special operations unit that was the precursor to modern Tier 1 teams. Men who wrote the book on unconventional warfare. The captain wasn't finished. He also holds 2 silver stars, 3 bronze stars for valor, and 4 purple hearts. After his service, Mr. Kahlo was a lead instructor at the farm, where he trained the first generation of counterterrorism operatives for the agency. "The marksmanship doctrine that you men," he said, finally letting his icy gaze fall directly on Trident, "were taught at Bud/S. He wrote the first draft, on the back of a C-ration box with a piece of charcoal. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the faint hum of the ventilation system. The 3 self-proclaimed masters of war looked like children who had been caught scribbling on the wall. The expensive gear, the tattoos, the swagger, it all evaporated, leaving behind only a raw, exposed humiliation. Leo, the young man William had defended, stared at the quiet old man, his mind struggling to connect the kind, grandfatherly figure with the warrior poet being described. He now understood. He hadn't been saved by a nice old man. He had been shielded by a living piece of American history. Captain Wallace finally lowered his salute. He took a step toward Trident, his expression turning from respect for William to pure, undiluted contempt for the younger man. "I saw the trident on your gear when I walked in," he said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. "You have the unmitigated gall to wear that symbol of honor and then use it to mock a man who bled for it before you were even born." Trident tried to speak, to stammer out an apology, but the words wouldn't come. He was choking on his own arrogance. "You are a disgrace to that uniform," the captain continued, his voice cutting like a razor. "You and your friends, you will give me your names and your unit. You will be on the first transport back to Coronado, and I promise you, by the time I am done with your commanding officer, your careers of playing dress-up soldier will be over. You will be lucky if you spend the rest of your enlistment chipping paint off a destroyer in Norfolk." He didn't shout. He didn't need to. The quiet finality of his words was more devastating than any tirade. With the sentence delivered, he turned his back on them, dismissing them as irrelevant. He faced William again, his tone softening. "Sir, is there anything you require?" William looked past the captain, his gaze falling on the crowd of onlookers, on the stunned range officer, and finally on Leo. He shook his head slowly. He then spoke, his voice carrying the quiet wisdom of a man who had seen the best and worst of humanity. "Respect," William said, his words meant for everyone, "isn't about the medals you wear or the stories you can tell. It's not about being the loudest voice in the room." He paused, his eyes meeting Leo's. "It's about how you treat people when no one is looking. It's about having the strength to be kind." He gave a small, reassuring nod to the young man he had protected. It was a simple gesture, but it conveyed a universe of meaning. It was an affirmation. It was approval. And as he stood there, the weight of the moment settling around him, another memory surfaced, brief and powerful. It wasn't of battle, but of its immediate aftermath. He was a young sailor, barely 20, lying on a stretcher, a piece of shrapnel in his leg. An older chief petty officer, A man whose face he could no longer recall but whose actions were etched into his soul, had stood over him, using his own body to shield him from the flying debris of a secondary explosion. The chief had looked down at him, winked and said, "Don't you worry, kid. I'm the shield. You're the spear. Just get ready to do your part." It was in that moment, under the protection of another, that William Callow understood his own purpose. He had been the spear for many years. Now he was the shield. The fallout was swift and merciless. Captain Wallace was true to his word. The 3 SEALs were escorted from the premises by the federal agents, their faces pale masks of disbelief and terror. Their public humiliation was only the beginning. An official inquiry was launched. The story of their conduct contrasted with the living legend they had mocked, spread like wildfire through the tight-knit naval special warfare community. It became a cautionary tale, a lesson in humility taught at the expense of 3 careers. Trident, whose real name turned out to be far less impressive than his nickname, was formally disciplined and reassigned to a menial desk job, the Trident emblem stripped from his uniform. His friends suffered similar fates. They had disrespected one of the pillars of their own temple, and were cast out for their sacrilege. The gun range returned to its normal rhythm, but things were different. The range officer now told the story to new members, a hushed lesson about the quiet man who sometimes came in on Saturdays. The legend of William Callow had found a new, unlikely home. A few days later, William was sitting in his small, tidy home, reading a book when the doorbell rang. He opened it to find Leo, the young man from the range, standing on his porch. The boy was holding a simple, store-bought coffee cake. He looked nervous, but his eyes were clear and steady. "Mr. Callow, sir," Leo began, his voice earnest. I just wanted to thank you, not just for, all that." He gestured vaguely, unable to properly articulate the scale of the event, "but for being kind, for not making me feel stupid." William looked at the young man, at the sincere gratitude in his face, and a rare small smile touched his own lips. He took the cake. "Come in, son," he said, holding the door open. "The name's William, and you're welcome." They sat in William's quiet living room, surrounded by books and photographs of a life well lived. Leo talked about his struggles with confidence, his hope of one day joining law enforcement. William listened, offering not grand pronouncements of wisdom but small practical words of encouragement. There were no uniforms, no salutes, no public spectacle. It was just a quiet conversation between 2 men, one old, one young. This, William thought, was the real reward. The public vindication was noise, a necessary consequence. The quiet gratitude of the person he had shielded, that was the signal. That was the mission accomplished. The shield had held. If you were inspired by William's story of quiet courage, show your support by liking this video and sharing it with someone who appreciates true valor. Subscribe to our channel for more stories that honor the heroes who walk among us, often unseen.